Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sustaining the Herd podcast, brought to you by Settje Agri-Services and Engineering of Raymond, Nebraska. I'm Brock Vitek.
And I'm Andrew Wadle.
And we are excited to be here with you all today for the final episode of our inaugural season of Sustaining the Herd. Today, we'll dive into a year in review of our first 17 episodes. For those who may be returning listeners to Sustaining the Herd, thank you for tagging along with us for this first season as we've hosted many guests and covered many topics as we talk about all things innovation and sustainability in animal agriculture. And for those who may be joining for maybe your second or third episode, or maybe the first episode, for any new listeners, we are so glad that you are here, and we extend a big welcome to the Sustaining the Herd family. And we hope that you enjoy this recap of Season 1.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate everything Brock just said. That it's been said many times before, but we wouldn't have a podcast if it wasn't for you, our listeners, and thank you very much for that. And we also have huge thank yous internally in that we the people in marketing, they're the ones that are behind the scenes. They create the scenes and they're behind the scenes. And we would like to thank the marketing manager at Settje Agri-Services and Engineering, and that is Jake Hall. He's done a fantastic job and been very patient with Brock and I as we have continued to put together this season of Sustaining the Herd, as well as we'd like to thank the ownership of Settje Agri-Services, and that is Zach Settje and Dean Settje. We couldn't do it without all of their support. And so, Brock, as we look at podcasts, I had to go and do the Google thing and just look at some just general statistics when it comes to podcasts. And, 100 million Americans listen to podcasts daily. That is astounding. That's almost a third of the population gets their information from podcasts. And so this thing is really growing. And when I think, I'm not sure about you, but when Jake proposed the idea of a podcast, it was like, is this something for real? Do people really do this? Well, the answer is people really do this. And the other thing is 90% of podcasts don't make it past episode 3. And of those that do make it past episode 3, only 10% make it to episode 20. And so that's less than 2% of podcasts make it to episode 20. And look where we are. We're at episode 18. So and thank you, Brock, for because you've been a great colleague here.
Thanks to you as well. And a brief programming note for all of our listeners. You're probably used to a new episode of Sustaining the Herd coming out every 2 weeks. However, that will not be the case over the holidays as we take 4 weeks off between today's episode and our first episode in 2025. So be on the lookout for a new episode on January 8th of next year.
So hey, let's go right into it, Brock. Sustaining the Herd, a year in review.
Yeah. So as we think back over this first year of Sustaining the Herd, not quite a full calendar year. We first started in April, but in season 1, a lot has happened. I never did I imagine we'd have such a diverse lineup of guests in terms of their experiences, their job roles, and the work that they do and the people they interact with and serve. We've covered everything from, we had worms and manure on a couple weeks ago. We've had attorneys, we've had a farmer, we've had a banker, and everyone in between. We've really just covered the spectrum of topics and possibilities here. And as we think about that broad scope, I'd like to just rein things in a bit and pose the question, what is sustainability, or what does sustainability mean to us here at Settje Agri-Services and to the clients that we serve?
Yeah, and so as we kind of go down this list, what I hope what we'll find is that if we've done our jobs right as hosts and people developing programming, it was our goal to weave in and out of these I'll say pillars or cornerstones of sustainability, and that is clean air and clean water. Everybody wants it.
Hmm.
Utilization of resources. Well, what does that mean? It's doing more with less, while at the same time taking care of clean air and water. We want healthy animals. Well, that's a key part of sustainability. We want to have successful businesses. Our businesses have to be successful for them to be sustainable and for them to be continuing on. And then it all wraps up with you really know if you're hitting the mark in sustainability when you are successfully coexisting with society. So I think that kind of embodies what sustainability means to Settje. And then, of course, in our world, it's working within animal agriculture. But of course, it's so much more than that.
Certainly, I think you laid that out well, Andrew, with those cornerstones or those pillars of sustainability in all shapes and forms. I'd like to dive into each of those a bit further and cover, highlight some of our guests and the conversations that we've had in this first season. And I'd like to start with clean air and water. And I know this is a topic that's come up many times, but the first folks I'd like to speak about on that would actually be a couple of our colleagues here at Settje, uh, those being Travis Casperson and Nick Maskey. Travis leads our environmental compliance and sales team, and Nick works closely with Travis and team for nutrient management planning, the management of nutrients found in manure. And boy, did we have a couple fun conversations with those guys back in episode 8 in July when we talked about compliance and nutrient management. And then they were back by popular demand once again for episode 14 in October as they talked about the other piece of it, which is permitting at both the local, state, and state levels and county zoning. And it's all for the intention of having clean air and water. I know. I think you said it back in episode 8 with those guys that you told them they are some of the unsung heroes of sustainability, and I really think that's the case because none of us probably like having to comply with governmental regulations a lot of times, but a lot of times those are there for a reason. And in this case, those regulations exist to protect clean air and water for the population. And Travis and Nick are out there day in and day out, making sure that everyone's following the law while also protecting the environment. And I just thought those conversations with them, really provided some insight into how agriculture works and how sustainability works day in and day out.
Yeah, and so Travis and Nick, they weaved into so many aspects of sustainability. What they do when it comes to permitting and compliance. It's business sustainability because utilizing manure nutrients saves producers money by recycling the nutrients in manure for fertilizer. It also it goes a long way towards keeping the manure out of the water, in that the manure is utilized in a fashion that makes manure handling as environmentally friendly as absolutely possible. And it also weaves into that idea of doing more with less. I mean, an animal agriculture is just an awesome recycling process, and those guys are the ones that really make it happen. So that was really good. Oh, and then I think also it was this speaks to business sustainability. You have to have a business that complies with the laws and regulations in order to be sustainable.
Exactly. And on some of those same topics, there are a couple other guests who I'd like to mention that I feel like weaved into a lot of those similar topics, which would be the two attorneys that we've had on. They were both outstanding. First being David Crass with Michael Best Law Firm, and next we had Mark Folson from here in Lincoln with Rembolt Lutke. And boy, were they both really fun to talk to. And they covered some of the same topics, but they both put their own twist on it with their own experiences, and really appreciated hearing about David's work up in Wisconsin in some of the earlier days of his career. And my understanding is you and David ran up against each other back in those days and worked together on some projects when the dairy industry was really changing, yeah, along with regulations at the time.
Yeah, when I look at attorneys, I think, man, they're smart guys and gals, and they kind of steer people around landmines in their respective fields, and it takes really smart people to address some of these complex situations. These large animal facilities that are huge investments that are in some cases situated, relatively close to population sources. This kind of goes hand in hand with some of the Nick and Travis's discussion, in that it takes the right team and the right people to get these facilities sited and in place in a way that helps the animal facilities coexist with society. And uh, Mark's approach, and a lot of the discussion with Mark involved just some more general aspects of business sustainability, and talking about things like labor, and some of the fun things that he has gotten into, some of the interesting cases. I
Hmm.
forget what he calls it, the law of adverse or inadvertent possession,
Oh,
things like
adverse
that.
possession, like
Yeah, yeah.
fence
So
line law, eminent domain, some of those
yeah,
things.
and so again, people who need to be really smart to be able to figure some things out, and in some in some real oldie worldy kinds of ways. So yeah,
Hmm.
the attorneys were fun to interview.
It's something I'd like to add on to the Mark conversation that I thought really made him stand out, and was that he has experience and a background as a livestock producer himself. Mark is a cattleman and an attorney. He's not just an attorney, and I really enjoyed hearing how that experience as a livestock producer has enabled him to better serve his clients in his legal practice. I
Yeah.
think that's something that we don't always hear about. And I think in our episode summary or our social media post, we had some fun with it and said, "Did you hear the one about the livestock producer and the attorney? Well, they're the same guy. Meet Mark." That's exactly it.
Yeah, yeah, that was good. And you know, I'll dig into a couple here, Brock, that really kind
Sure.
of stuck out for me. It was really fun to interview Lynn Bodwine. He was the first producer. Lynn Bodwine, an old colleague of mine. Lynn Bodwine out of Baltic, South Dakota, milks a lot of cows up the I-29 corridor, and he talked about his experience with sustainability related to anaerobic digestion. You know, as you know, Brock, so much of what we do these days at Settje Agri-Services involves anaerobic digestion. And we know that these systems are good for the air and good for the water and good for business sustainability.
Hmm.
And it was really fun to hear this talked about from a producer's perspective. And one of the things that I took away from Lynn's episode, and perhaps you did too, is and this is for all the digester developer friends out there that we have, that we know listen, and that is, there's one thing for certain, in that a dairy producer is going to be a dairy producer first, and a biogas producer second. Not a distant second, but it's second. And so dairy producers are committed to first producing food, and then secondarily in the business of producing biogas. And we need to be thinking about that as system designers and developers, that what these core businesses are.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I really enjoyed sitting down with you and Lynn for that conversation. I could honestly talk to Lynn for an entire afternoon if we had the time to do so. That was just a blast. And something else I'd like to highlight from the conversation with Lynn, which actually ties into another part of that episode, was the fact that a busy guy like Lynn, along with our friend Tom Ersch from Michigan, they were willing to step away from their dairy operations to travel down to St. Louis to spend some time with us at the American Biogas Council's Business Biogas Conference. And those gentlemen spoke on a panel session that we hosted. And we were also fortunate to grab Lynn for a podcast episode at that same time. So just really appreciate leading producers like themselves who are willing to step away from their busy schedules to go out and interact with the industry. And I remember after we recorded that episode, Andrew, and we got all our equipment packed up, we said, darn, we should have taken a picture because we were sitting with the St. Louis Arch in the background. It was like the most scenic
Yeah.
recording studio we've ever had. That was just a cool moment to be sitting in St. Louis with Lynn and, just getting a little further into the conversation with him. I appreciated that he was just very real and honest about his experience uh, building biogas projects in his farms. And he had a lot of great things to say about the developer and the companies that he's worked with. But he also wasn't afraid to say that he is a dairy producer first, just like you said, and that is what matters to him because his family's been around for over 100 years uh, in the dairy business, and they'd like to be around for at least another 100 years. And this whole biogas movement hasn't been around quite that long. So we have to keep the right perspective and respect who people are and what they do, and figure out how we can all work together. And that was a big lesson for me.
Yep.
I can take away from
Yep.
Lynn.
And speaking of American Biogas Council, boy, we certainly have to recognize our very first guest, and that was Patrick Serfass, who is the executive director of the American Biogas Council. And boy, did he do a great job of really setting the stage for the importance of biogas and and what that means to clean air, clean water. And it was great to have him on, kind of breaking it all down.
Yeah, Patrick is an outstanding spokesman for the American biogas industry, and I really enjoyed having him on. And as you said, he is broke it down so well, explaining the very basics of biogas production while also covering some of the most pressing topics and issues for the industry today. And always great to catch up with Patrick once in a while when we're at the ABC meetings.
Yeah, and as for other industry associations, we can't forget episode 3 was Lara Moody. Lara is the executive director of the Institute for Feed Education and Research Center, which is part of the American Feed Industry Association. And so, boy, there's another place where we're talking about doing more with less. That is, how are we, producing feed in a manner that we have better conversions, producing less methane, and just really focusing on the inputs of sustainability. A lot of times we talk about manure when it comes to sustainability, but it becomes a matter of what goes in and what comes out. And so what the Institute for Feed Education and Research is doing is fantastic.
Yeah, I was very impressed by the work that Lara and her team are doing, and how hard they work to represent not only animal agriculture as a whole here in the United States, but the feed industry specifically. There's a whole team of passionate people there who are making things happen and trying to do better every single day. And I know Laura talked about their sustainability toolkit that they were developing at the time. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to take a look, Andrew. I saw a while back on LinkedIn that Lara and iFeeder had put a couple posts out about it. It would encourage everyone to go to LinkedIn or go to iFeeder's website to check that out. They have some neat information available that she gave us a teaser of on episode 3.
Excellent. So we've talked about manure, we've talked about businesses, talked about compliance, and well, one of the things we haven't talked about is the cows or the animals.
Mm-hmm.
And as I led with, most everything we do at Settje Agri-Services and Engineering involves animal agriculture in some way. And for our non-ag listeners or our our people in town friends, it's really important that cows, milking cows, we're talking about, stay in the milking herd for as long as reasonably possible.
Hmm.
And one of the ways that happens is keeping them keeping their feet healthy. As as odd as it may sound, maybe it's quite perhaps intuitive that you have to have good feet and legs in order to carry on, to walk, to feed, to walk, to be milked. And so, boy, we had in episode 10, boy, we had a great sit down with Carl Berge, whose passion is hoof care in dairy cows. And Carl, a native of Switzerland, came here on he came here on vacation once, and he never left. And at the same time, he is the go-to person in the world when it comes to hoof health. And he literally wrote the book on the subject.
Yeah, Carl was a great guest, and I'll tell you what, I do not have a background in hoof health or animal biology, and I learned so much in that episode. And I received feedback from quite a few people, both some of our colleagues here at Settje and from other listeners that, hey, I really enjoyed that hoof guy on the podcast. Like, I've heard that quite a few times, and it was just a fun topic that we don't always think about, but people find interesting, and it's critically important to sustainability. Andrew, you mentioned that touches on the pillar or cornerstone of healthy animals, but I think it also goes to utilization of resources. Like you said, keeping milking cows in the herd for as long as possible. That's just efficient use of resources, and getting the most you can out of a resource, and extending the lifespan of that resource, and just taking care of cows, because animal welfare, animal health really is paramount to the stewardship component of animal agriculture. And Carl's leading the way there for sure.
And for our dairy producer friends that are listening, the thing that I found most interesting about what Carl said, it was all interesting, but the biggest take home for me was the best way to preserve hoof health is to keep cows laying down. So you want to have a comfortable stall surface so that the cows are laying down for as long as possible, so that they don't need to be on their feet. So I found that really interesting, as well as not overstocking things like the holding pens, where cows are pushing against one another, pushing sideways, and causing different hoof injuries and things like that. So yeah, you want to keep cows' hooves healthy, keep them laying down.
Mm-hmm. No different than if you want the tread to wear slower on your car tires, leave it in the garage.
Keep it in the garage.
Yeah, just one more thing on Carl. I really appreciated that he was willing to speak about the beef industry as well. I know he works primarily in dairy, but does have some experience with beef cattle too. And given that at Settje, much of our business does take place in the beef industry, enjoyed hearing about when he talked about long-fed cattle such as Wagyu, and how those cattle will need to have their hooves trimmed and cared for, when we don't typically think about that in a feedlot. But once again, just so much that we learned from Carl. And on the similar topic, but also maybe touching on this pillar of coexistence with society, which I think that Travis and Nick and Mark and David touched on, I'd like to mention a really fun guest who was Anna Kobza back in July on episode 7. Anna's a fun person to talk to, and she really makes an impact in the industry. And I have to give a little bit of a shout out that I think the only way we're able to get her on, because she's so busy working on her PhD program and involved in the family ranch, is that her fiance, Kane Wellnitz, is a colleague of ours here at Settje. So I think Kane put in a good word for us. So shout out to you, Kane. Thank you very much for helping get Anna scheduled. Yeah, she was great, as she talks about her large following on Instagram. I don't think she likes the title of influencer, because Anna's one of those people that she's just out there doing what she believes to be right and being a good steward. And that's the influence she has, even if it comes along with the social media title. And the fact that she's working on her PhD in ruminant nutrition at the University of Nebraska, Anna's someone that's really doing a great job of helping consumers understand what agriculture production looks like and how food really gets from the farm to their fork. And I think that's a story that can often get misconstrued or just not told. And Anna's a trailblazer in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the big takeaway from Anna's episode for me was, and sometimes it's good to hear the obvious, because sometimes the stuff that's obvious is the stuff that we just kind of overlook,
Hmm.
and that is uh, Anna was willing to talk to the antis, or our perceived adversaries, in terms of animal agriculture, particularly I think cattle feeding, and
Hmm.
so the take home was talk to people, talk to people, and find where the common ground is. Sometimes it's not there, but more often than not, it is. And so I think that's something that applies to cattle feeding, animal agriculture, or just in our day to day. And Anna is somebody who doesn't just talk about it, but she actually does it with a
Yeah,
large following on a
yeah.
large scale.
Don't shy away from those conversations with people who may be different than you or have a different opinion or belief than you do. It's sometimes I think those are the most productive conversations that we can have.
Yep, yep. And so a couple other ones, Brock, that are coming to mind, that are sticking out. They're all sticking out, right? Because they all plugged in somewhere into our mission. But Charles Love from Trillium, which is part of the Love family of companies, we back to the whole anaerobic digestion uh, thing that we've got going on right now, and that we talk a lot about tanks and pumps and reactors and biomethane potential and all these things, but very little. We don't spend a lot of time talking about where the gas is going,
Hmm.
and Charles is so incredibly passionate about taking this biogas that's produced from manure and getting it into over the road trucks. I mean, think about it. You're driving down the highway, you look over at a semi truck, you don't know if it's being fueled potentially by diesel or biomethane produced from cows or cattle. I think
Hmm.
that's incredible, and that's what Charles does, is you know trying to get biogas into use for over the road trucks.
Hmm. Yeah, Charles really took us beyond the concrete and steel, as I would like to put it. I think day in and day out, that's the world we work in with engineering and working with the livestock producers. But Charles takes the gas and gets it out there to the end users. And I don't know that I've met anyone more passionate than he is about that. And he really helped us to understand what's that look like once the gas enters the pipeline. And Andrew, another episode I would like to touch on was one of our colleagues. That would be Zach Settje.
Hmm.
Zach talked to us about what it looks like to execute a successful livestock facility construction project. And I think a lot of what Zach said can be applied to construction projects in general, even outside of livestock production. But boy, wasn't that a fun episode?
Yeah, absolutely. To hear, uh, I think it's really valuable for hopefully people who are contemplating projects, to hear what makes a successful project from a contractor's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall quite vividly that, just like everything we do in life, a huge part of it is communication, communication, and that we need to be talking about expectations and talking about you know what our goals are in order to execute a successful project. And and speaking of passionate people when it comes to manure and sustainability, I think everybody is going to remember episode 17 and Jim Wallace talking about vermiculture. And in case you don't have your thesaurus handy, vermiculture is worm farming, quite plainly put. And Jim's company, Biofiltro, takes dairy manure and puts it through a bed of biomass, and in that biomass is worms, and the worms do what worms do when in biomass and manure, and the byproduct of the process is water, treated water, not dischargeable water by any means, but basically water with nutrients in it, as well as nutrient-rich biomass, and it really has potential to change the industry.
Yeah, it really does. And I think it's a topic that people may not always think about. Using earthworms to treat dairy manure, what? But it's a real thing, and Jim and his colleagues at Biofiltro are doing it at scale, and also with what I might call an innovative business model, where they're um, generating and selling the environmental attributes from the process, or maybe more loosely coined carbon credits, and that's one of the revenue streams, in addition to the nutrients being a revenue stream from the process. So a very fun episode and very interesting topic.
Yeah, and if you ever find yourself cruising out on the web and look up Biofiltro, you can find episodes where the water from a system was discharging into a what I say formerly was a manure holding pond, and they are wakeboarding on this former manure holding pond that is receiving now the liquid fraction from worm farming. So it's like, wow, that's pretty incredible.
Talk about something cool. And
Yeah.
finally, we have one more guest that we haven't mentioned yet, and it was a great episode. And that was with Mariah Johnson, who is the vice president of corporate sustainability with a few farm credit associations, being Farm Credit Services of America, Frontier Farm Credit, and Ag Country Farm Credit Services, all covering the Midwest here. And it's like I said in the beginning of the episode here, when we've had lawyers, we've had a farmer, we had a banker, and Mariah may not be a loan officer herself, but she works with and represents a leading agricultural lending institution here in the country. And I don't know what you thought, Andrew, but I think they're taking a really neat and proactive approach to sustainability at Farm Credit.
Yeah, absolutely, they are. They're doing everything they can to point their producers in the direction of sustainable practices, but at the same time, they're talking the talk and walking the walk by lending money for those practices, and that's a huge part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
they recognize. So Farm Credit, as an organization, is recognizing the value in sustainability, even if it doesn't have, a monetizable value that shows up in the cash register, so to speak.
exactly. And to touch on the cornerstones of sustainability that you laid out here for this episode, they're certainly touching on successful businesses and profitable businesses there with the financial aspect of it. But also, I think utilization of resources. Farm Credit is taking an approach where they're willing to walk along with producers as they look at new technologies and new ways of sustainable production, and not being afraid to explore those and maybe take a little risk. And something that really stuck out to me from our conversation with Mariah that I thought just really stood out from anything else in the episode was the fact that Farm Credit is working to show up for producers the way that producers want them to when it comes to matters of sustainability. Farm Credit is not trying to tell producers, here's what you need to be doing for sustainable practices, or they're really truly being a partner rather than here's what you have to do. And I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, I think we've run through our 17 different guests, although not 17 different, because we double dipped with Travis and Nick for all
And,
the right reasons.
and we had a couple episodes where just you and I, similar to today, we can maybe mention those briefly if we'd like. One was the ABCs of getting paid for biogas, where we broke down all the acronyms and different revenue streams, or a lot of them at least, for the monetization of biogas projects. That was
Yep.
a fun one, the alphabet soup there. Another was manure management for digester developers 101. I believe it was called hoof blocks, um, neck
Ear tags
chains,
and
and ear tags. Yeah, something like that. Well, the different things, hammer handles, stuff that you can
yeah,
find in manure and could break a pump. Exactly. And
yeah.
that was a fun one too.
Yeah, that was interesting because it's probably the most relatable to my day to day, so to speak, at Settje in working with digester developers to help them avoid those kinds of pitfalls. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, so those were all the episodes, and I think Brock, I've got to say, I think we hit it. I think we of those 5 pillars that we laid out, I think we did all right. But that was yesterday, as they say. And what does the future hold? And so what do you see for the future of sustaining the herd?
That's a great question. I'll do my best to answer that. I see a few things. I think one that we've talked about quite a bit is having receiving input from our listeners and having more interaction with them. Whether that is really encouraging our listeners and our audience to send us a message with any topic recommendations they might have, and also got a couple examples of this. We've been at the American Biogas Council meetings this year, and we've actually met some listeners in person who've come up to us and said, "Hey, you're the guys from Sustaining the Herd," and literally some face to face interaction, and or in phone conversations or virtual meetings, we've had people say, "Hey, we listened to your podcast," and that I think I speak for both of us when I say that just makes our day to know that someone other than my mom or your wife is listening to us, right? So
Yeah.
that's encouraging. So more listener input and interaction is really towards the top of the list for me. What about
Yeah,
you?
yeah, absolutely. And so, on that note, as you continue to listen, and thank you for listening, by all means, leave comments and let us know what else you'd like us to cover. We're willing to consider almost anything as long as it falls in those falls on top of those pillars of sustainability. And so, something that I'd like to do is, I'd like us to branch out. I think we talk quite a bit about dairy. We talk quite a bit about beef, but maybe we need to branch out into some other different species. Get some swine producers and poultry producers.
Hmm.
They all certainly have a place at the table when it comes to the production of protein in the United States and the world.
Yeah, and I think about looking across the value chain, not only producers from different species, but what about the processors? Getting
Hmm.
getting a packer on here, maybe someone who's involved in meat processing or food processing. I know that's something we've talked about too, and just really looking at the end to end, who's all involved in the production of food and animal agriculture, and maybe that's some
Yeah,
crop producers too, who produce the feedstuffs that go into livestock production.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that would be awesome. And then I think we want to continue to talk about the new technologies, talk about the worm farmings and the things like that more and more that are gonna come along because these are complex systems. These animal manure systems are large complex systems, and it's going to take a lot of people coming to the table with a lot of different technologies because all these operations are different. They all require something just a little bit different. Maybe some of them require vastly different. And so we need to keep, if we're doing our job in innovation and sustainability, Brock, we're always looking
Hmm.
what's out there on the horizon and bringing those people uh, onto sustaining the herd, and kind of we can vet them out, right here, is see if they make sense and see what our listeners think.
Exactly. I not only is innovation and sustainability quite literally in both of our job titles, but it's part of a big part of what we do every single day. And I personally really think that innovation and sustainability go hand in hand. If we're not innovating or changing or adapting, might be some synonyms for that. I don't know that we're going to be able to stick around. We're not going to be sustainable. Can't do things the way that we've always done them. So it's really focusing on how are people adapting and changing and being innovative in an effort to be sustainable. And I, like you said, this is a place here on Sustaining the Herd where we can vet out these new technologies and new ways of doing things. And I'd really like to view this as as a platform or maybe even a community of sorts where our listeners, we can all gather every couple of weeks and come together to learn and challenge our thinking and try to think about what could the agriculture industry look like uh, tomorrow, next year, maybe the next decade and beyond.
Well, Brock, I think that's an excellent way to kind of bookend this season of sustaining the herd. And again, we would like to thank our listeners, because if we didn't have our listeners and our people doing downloads, we would not have we would not have a podcast. And right now our podcasts downloads are in the thousands, and so thank you very much for that. And we're going to continue to grow. Have to again thank Jake Hall, our marketing manager. Would not be possible without you for kind of putting this idea out for Brock and me, putting on the podcast. It's the easy part. It's the fun part. You did the hard part, and Dean and Zach Settje for giving us this opportunity to talk about sustainability. We're passionate about it. Dean and Zach are super passionate about it. And lastly, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year's, Happy Holidays from everybody at Settje Agri-Services and Engineering.
Thanks, Andrew. And as we look to close out season 1, as we think about the Sustaining the Herd schedule, you normally hear from us every 2 weeks. So 2 weeks from today would put us on December 25th, which is Christmas Day. And as much as I'm sure you would love to wake up on Christmas morning, open your phone first thing, and have the wonderful gift of a brand new episode of Sustaining the Herd there for you, sorry to disappoint. We're going to take 4 weeks off. We're going to take a month off over the holidays, and then we'll be back with our next episode on Wednesday, January 8th. And let me tell you, it's going to be a good one. So we hope that you can wait in anticipation for a month for January 8th. Until next year, thank you for joining the herd today.